Welcome back, everyone. This is day two of encryption prep. First, a little bit of like a life update in Ecuador. Things are pretty cool. I've settled in a bit more to a routine. Things in general are like pretty routine in Quito. It always rains every day at like 4 p.m. every single time. I've identified a few more of these plants out the window. So that one there that's like tall and has this burst of leaves at the top is called a guarumo. It's technically one species of guarumo. There's a bunch of others that exist in the Amazon and Ecuador that branch out a lot more. One thing that's interesting about this is that it has a symbiotic relationship with like Aztec ants that live inside of the trunk, which is hollow. So if any like herbivores try to prey on it, then the ants will come out and attack them. And in exchange, they get like some sugars and stuff that are secreted inside of the plant, which is interesting. Also, over here, there's a spiky plant. I don't know if you can see it. Maybe, hopefully. That's a giant yucca, like a tree yucca, which is cool. You get some, I think it's a slightly different variety, but you get some like that in like the north of Mexico. Kitty content. Kitty is settling in. She has her little fish toy, and she's been exploring the rest of the apartment gradually. So that's life in Ecuador. It's coming along. Um, Now about encryption, I've been prepping quite a bit. I've actually done a lot more prep than will be included in this video, but I've attached another document called encryption card spam. And before people clown me, because I know this always happens every single time, people are gonna pull up in the comments and they're gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, your card cutting is so egregious." I want to be clear that like the intention of this card spam is I hesitate to even call these cards. They're not supposed to be cards. This is just how I take notes when I start a topic. Like instead of taking notes or just reading things, I like to keep things in order. And so I will copy an article and then I will go through line by line and just highlight anything and everything that I think could be relevant. And that's just like a method of note taking for me. So these are not intended to be cards. I'm not going to use any of these in cases as cards, right? Like the way that I will do this is, and I'll show you this in future days when I actually do start writing the cases. I will copy these cards and then unhighlight like 90% of the words that are highlighted in order to make it a functional card in the case. Because it is true, like some of these are awful in terms of the amount that's highlighted. Like a good like 50%, more than like 60, 70% of the words in this card are highlighted. This is not how you should cut cards, and this is not how I cut cards. This is not a card. This is just notes. So just to get that straightened out, if you do want to use any of these, you should make them into cards by not highlighting as many words as I've highlighted, and go read the article yourself. Like this also, I guess one way I could spin this is like I'm doing this intentionally so that you go and cut your own cards. But really, this is just literally how I take notes at the beginning of a topic, which is also why there's not really sites yet. Those will come once I actually start integrating these into cases. Right now, this is just a source, like a font from which I can derive easy cards that I can easily remember. Oh, I have that somewhere, and then I can turn this into a card. Okay, enough explanation of that. I'm going to start this with the Q&A. So there's a lot of questions on the on my last video on the YouTube. So I'll go through some of those comments. The first one was talking about like the weird topicality interpretations of the wording. It says that all the technology companies that I talked about, they all have encryptions between in their communications between like their employees and stuff. I think this is misunderstanding a little bit my point. Like this is certainly true, to be clear. Every like company has uses encrypted communications between its people. If you're like emailing each other, you're using usually end-to-end encryption as well. And so my point was really just that I think the word technology in the resolution, like technology companies, implies that this is not just about the encrypted communications between employees of a company, because I think that that would be too broad. Like I feel like the resolution is getting to something that's more about specifically technology companies, and specifically the ones that this would apply to are the technology companies that have or host some kind of platform for communication. So, like, we're talking about Apple and Google, Facebook, right? Any kind of technology company that hosts the communications between different users is probably in the debate. But I don't necessarily know that random technology companies like Nvidia are in the debate. Like, I don't really know if that's what the resolution's intending. And also, just in terms of all the research I've done today, it doesn't seem like technology companies are ever being used that way in like all of the debates about this, online at least, and like the articles that I've read. Obviously, this is still up for interpretation. I would be very surprised if I don't see someone pull some interesting, like, oh, well, yeah, technically this manufacturing company is a technology company because they're making technologies and we need to get like the communications between their employees for some reason. But I also just don't think this matters that much. I mean, I guess we'll see, but I can't think of all that many cases in which it would be substantially impactful if we like were able to figure out the communications between the employees of like a technology company that doesn't host communications. I don't know. I guess we'll see where the topic goes. What do you think of the modeling link? So every topic has a modeling link, and every time I hear a modeling link, I'm like a little bit, I don't know. It's like a 3 out of 10 link, like consistently in every resolution. The modeling link keeps reappearing, and the story of it is literally just like the US does things and is big and is like a leader. And so when the US does things, other countries do those things too. And if the US doesn't do these things, then maybe those other countries would either not do them or they would like do them in the way that other big countries do them instead. So like sometimes you hear this as like a weird like pseudo hegemony argument. It's like we have to do this because if we don't do this, then China's going to do this, and then everyone else will learn from China, and then they will be able to dictate the rules about how this works, and we won't. So we have to do this thing. Um, Consistently, I think this is just always kind of underwarranted. Like it seems like these other countries have the ability to do this without the US doing it. At best, maybe like the fact that the US has done this first shields them a little bit from domestic criticism because they can point to the US having done it. But I think that's like a really marginal link in most of these cases. I tried to find a little bit of evidence on it. I stumbled upon this from the FBI. I guess take it with a grain of salt. It just says, without any warrant, that like, I guess if companies in the US do this and comply with this, then they will help like develop lawful access standards in other countries as well. Again, like no reason why, even if you read the small text at all. This is just like a list of claims that the FBI is making that seems somewhat self-serving. But I guess people are talking about this. Like I'm sure there's some reasoning that you could provide for this. And I guess at least some people online are making this claim, so you could probably put it in a case. I'm just not that persuaded by it. Okay, there were two questions that I will like group here that are about legal hacking. So this one is about there's an article about how ICE was just given access to some very sophisticated legal hacking software. Thanks for bringing this to my attention. I actually didn't know about this, but I went and found an article. I don't know if it's the same article you're referring to, but it's probably the same phenomenon. That ICE got this new hacking software. They're in a contract with Paragon Solutions. It was founded in Israel. It's now under I think it's now under control of a US company. They made this special spyware technology that's called graphite it's like crazy actually. This is like some dystopian stuff. This technology can hack into any phone and like take control of it, like do anything. You can even like turn the microphone into like a listener. So like if it's in your phone and you're having a conversation, or if your phone is in your pocket, you're having like a conversation with someone, I guess like ICE can like listen in through the phone in your pocket without you even knowing. Kind of scary stuff. So it lagged during the Biden administration, but then like I guess the Trump administration has gone ahead and greenlit it. It has had a history of like a lot of controversy. So Italy, for example, the Italian government apparently used it on a bunch of journalists and like human rights activists, which wasn't really great. And there's a lot of concerns about how ICE might use this. Obviously, it has already been used against journalists and advocates and dissidents. So, who knows? The question though is more like, so this question is, would this be then an AF argument that's like, if we don't do the AF, then this is what the alternative is, right? Like we will have these agencies do legal hacking with spyware instead. So they'll just break through encryption by like taking control of your phone, or they don't even need to break through encryption. They will like find other sketchier methods around to get the same information that they otherwise would have gotten by decrypting it. Um, I think this is interesting. I think the wording of this question is a bit too strong. Like it says, maybe affirming means they switch to using a warrant-based system implied by lawful access. I just don't really know. Like, okay, let's think about this trade-off here. If ICE were to try to get information, I guess in the AF world, they have two different ways they could. Either they try the easier and cheaper way, which in the AF world would be just use this requirement, ask the company nicely. The company has to say yes and provide you with the information. It has to be lawful though. So what about the instances where they can't get a warrant? Well, then they still have this spyware. Like the contract doesn't dissolve. And so it seems like they just keep maybe they would switch to warrants in every case where they can get a warrant, but they would not switch to warrants when they can't get a warrant. So it seems like this doesn't like reduce the unlawful spyware that's happening in any case. Maybe it just like if anything, maybe it frees up more resources for them to use in spyware because it means that they have less resources they need to devote to other kinds of things like decrypting, or like some of the cases where they would have to use spyware, they no longer have to because they can get a warrant and use the decryption. So then it frees up their ability to use that spyware in other areas instead. So if anything, this might actually increase the amount of spyware used in unlawful cases. So I'm not sure that this is really a great pro argument. The other question here is curious if you think pro teams will argue that lawful hacking is part of lawful access. I think this is not topical. So the literature that I've read, so that's the other stuff under here, consistently phrases lawful hacking as an alternative to like requiring a backdoor access, basically. So this evidence talks about this an alternative method that so this talks about extending this legislation that it applied in the past, or I think it still does, to like telecommunications, extending that legislation to the internet. The legislation is basically the AF. This Kalea bill was basically the AF in the context of telecommunications. It just like required that telecommunications companies, like phone providers, built in a system that allowed the government to wiretap more easily. So extending that to the rest of the internet would just be, you know, building in a method for the government to tap into encrypted communications more easily, which is just is the AF. So an alternative to the AF is legalized hacking. That seems like it's very clearly not the AF. If you want more one that's like even clearer, this evidence from Liguori is very clear that like this is, and this evidence actually says that legal hacking is better, but it says that it's definitely a preferable substitute to mandating exceptional access to encrypted systems. So mandating exceptional access to encrypted systems is literally the AF. That's what lawful access is. Exceptional in this case just means like for law enforcement only, or in exceptional cases where they get a warrant, right? And so it seems like this is definitely not the AF. Like this is not topical at all, according to the evidence that I've read. That means it's more likely to be used as a counterfactual. So if you're reading like evidence like this, you might actually read this on the con and say that lawful hacking, like this legal hacking, is preferable and is currently happening, and is better than it gets you the same information without all of the pitfalls of lawful access to encrypted data, which would be an interesting argument on the neg. This card says sort of the opposite, that it actually is like really bad and it has a lot of pitfalls. Both of them actually do agree that like there's a lot of other things we have to figure out before lawful hacking really becomes something that is very like on at scale, something that is viable, even though it's currently being used in some small instances. But who knows? It's probably going to increase in the status quo either way. Okay, there's another question that wasn't in my YouTube, but I saw it on Reddit, which is that I think there's some confusion over backdoors, and this confusion is like intentional. Like the FBI, I think, has intentionally caused this confusion. So it stems from this part of the FBI's website, which says like, don't worry, actually, we don't want a backdoor at all. We're not seeking a backdoor. We're seeking like a front door. We're just asking the tech companies to maintain the ability to access readable content and then provide us with this content when we have like a warrant. The weird thing is like that sounds like a backdoor. I don't know. Like I guess they're just throwing around this word backdoor and they're being like, don't. It's not quite the same thing. Like they're defining backdoor in a different way, but then they're asking for what I would call a backdoor anyway, and what a lot of the other evidence is calling a backdoor anyway. This is cleared up more in this evidence from Congress, which just is like, look, bro, like they say, oh, we want a front door, not a back door, because backdoor sounds too secretive. But it doesn't matter. Like any door that can be unlocked means that there's more vulnerability. So I don't think that this stuff about how, oh, there's not technically a backdoor is able to prevent the neg from arguing that there will be an additional vulnerability for hackers to use. This is very clear in this evidence from Wicker that says, there's a bill, the Lawful Access to Encrypted Data bill. It doesn't technically contain a backdoor mandate, but the reason it doesn't include a backdoor mandate is because the text of the bill says the companies just figure it out themselves. Like, you have to provide us this unencrypted data however you can. So the problem is there's no way to provide law enforcement unencrypted data without building in a backdoor. Like, the whole point with end-to-end encryption is that no one has the key except the people who are sending and receiving the messages, including the company. And so the only possible way the company could ever have a decrypted version of the data, not being one of the senders or recipients, one of the parties to the communication, would be if they had their own key, which is a backdoor. Like that is what it is. It seems like it is impossible to even imagine any other way that a company could comply. And so it seems like this is some weird, like, well, technically we didn't say they have to have a backdoor, but in reality, like practically you are mandating that they create a backdoor. That's at least my interpretation of all of this. Okay. So I did some prep on the Pro. In the interest of time, I'm only going to talk about the prep I did on the Pro. I did a lot of prep on the Con. It's all in here. You can go find it. But yeah, we'll talk about the arguments that I was going to prep. So last time I said I wanted to prep the stock Pro and the stock Con first. That's what I did. The stock Pro is just like they're bad guys and we have to figure out information on them. So the uniqueness is that currently we're not able to get that encrypted information. And then the link is that we will be able to do that through some enforcement mechanism that includes getting law enforcement lawful access to data. There remains like a question of what the implementation actually looks like. And one of the ways of answering that question is by going and looking for different bills that have been proposed. So I found two. One I already talked about, which is the expansion of this Kalea law, which was for wiretapping phones. The idea is just expanding that to the rest of the internet. So that's one possibility. So looking into what the Kalea stuff is about might give you some more insight into the most probable implementation of this topic. The other one is probably a more substantial bill that's more related to the topic, which is the Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act. This was proposed by Congressman Lindsey Graham and two Republican colleagues, I think in 2020. And it basically says the AF. Like it's the AF with a bit of other things that are not in the AF. So the legislation requires service providers and device manufacturers, so not quite technology companies, but like more or less the same, to assist law enforcement in accessing encrypted data and devices after a court issues a warrant based on probable cause. Sure. However, this bill also does some other things. So it also incentivizes technological innovation through a prize competition for solutions that allow lawful access and encrypted environments while ensuring maximum privacy and security, which is all well and good, but like the problem is I don't know what those solutions could possibly look like. Like again, it seems relatively straightforward. Like you need a key to access this, and then that is a vulnerability. But maybe there's some other ways to protect that key in some way. So this would like mandate that millions of dollars are spent on this prize competition to go find that solution wherever it exists. So maybe that reduces some of the disadded links. And then the final part that's not really in the resolution, but is in this bill, is that it would fund training for law enforcement personnel on accessing digital evidence. Now, I do think that despite these things not explicitly being in the resolution, I do think you could make like reasonable arguments that this is probably how the resolution would go if it were to be passed. Like probably resolution gets passed, and then this kind of like addendum stuff gets passed afterwards, right? Like it seems to make logical sense that you would also want to train your law enforcement personnel to be able to read and access the digital evidence that you get from the resolution. So I would bet that, like, I think you could use this as not necessarily a most likely implementation of the resolution, but as like some evidence that this is something that might accompany the resolution or happen directly after the resolution in response to criticisms and concerns. And here's just the text of the bill or like the summary of the bill on the Congress website. So might be something worth investigating. Also means that if you can find any articles that like praise or criticize this bill, then those will be your best friend because they will be much more specific than a lot of the other general articles that might not be about the most probable implementation. Okay, so here's the prep I did on the Pro. So the uniqueness and link were pretty easy because there's lots of people talking about this. So I found this evidence from the FBI, obviously maybe find a less biased source, but it says everything we want, right? It's like criminals, they plan and they do crimes using encrypted networks online. We're in like this dark space where we can't access this anymore. They do a lot of really terrible things. Victims are deprived of justice because we can't get the evidence because of encryption. They call it warrant-proof encryption. This is just the same as end-to-end encryption, but they want to make it sound scarier. And then this is an interesting part that I want to note. Law enforcement will have to rely on alternative investigative methods. They don't specify which. These alternative methods can be dangerous. I don't know why. Again, I don't know what these are, can come at great expenses to the taxpayer and are often not scalable or timely substitutes. So this is interesting because I think the pro, if you investigate this and find better evidence about what these are, maybe this is like the legal hacking stuff, you can find some arguments that are like all of the harms the con talks about will happen inevitably, just worse, like just less effective at doing the good things and more likely to do the bad things, more likely to be dangerous in some way. And so you can steal some of the con ground with this counterfactual. This evidence from the European Commission, I mean, it's about Europe, but it probably applies, says that 85% of investigations rely on digital evidence, but it's hard to get because of a lot of different things, including encryption. This evidence says in wiretaps specifically, like half of the warrants that were given for wiretaps were for narcotics investigations. About one fourth, a little bit less, like 472 out of 2,101 of these wiretaps in 2023 had encrypted content, and 90% of those could not be decrypted. So, this is the problem that we're facing, I guess, that is supposed to be solved by the resolution. Then I found a bunch of different cards for specific crime areas. So this evidence is about human trafficking. It is enabled through end-to-end encryption. Obviously, that implies that being able to get access to through end-to-end encryption would give law enforcement the tools necessary to stop some of this. This is the same thing in the context of migrant trafficking and explains it a little bit more. So it might be useful evidence. This stuff is about cybercrime, which again is strategic because it might be able to grant you a link turn that competes with some of the links on the neg about cyber vulnerabilities being built into the system. Maybe if we catch the cyber criminals before they're able to exploit any vulnerability, and like vulnerabilities are relatively non-unique, then you can use this as a fairly good link to cyber that is potentially stronger than the neg link to cyber. So it says cyber criminals, they use end-to-end encryption for all of their activities to plan all of this stuff and stuff. And we need to do countermeasures to this. This might be like a non-unique on the solvency, like maybe we can do international cooperation. I don't really know what that would look like unless the international cooperation involves some kind of decryption. So probably the AF is one of the only ways to solve. Here are some cards that are the same thing about drug cartels in Mexico. So this evidence says it could be used by the neg as well if you're going to impact turn this. But this says that like the CIA, for example, relies on picking up encrypted data and decrypting it, decoding it in order to like plan attacks on cartels, like physical attacks with guns and stuff. And so the neg could potentially turn this and be like, well, we shouldn't be doing very many of these attacks because they backfire or they fail or they do XYZ. They create more civilian casualties. Um, the AF could either say these attacks will happen either way. It's better to have them with more accurate information to reduce the amount of backfiring and civilian harm. Or they could also just say that these attacks are good because they stop cartels and otherwise the cartels like I don't know, they create state failure or they traffic more illegal drugs, they kill people, or they do more human trafficking or they do cybercrime. I found like a card that said that the cartels also do a bunch of cyber attacks. They like somehow cyber attacked the FBI, I think, the Sinaloa cartel did. And then this is just another card that says that they do use encryption for a lot of stuff, which makes sense. This stuff is very interesting. I thought this was going to be only an AF argument about watchdogs. it seems that there might be an impact turn on the neg as well that I'll get to. But the argument is about subpoenas. So the idea is that like in court, you can like the court can subpoena certain evidence. You can be asked to hand over evidence that you have that might aid in the criminal prosecution or whatever. And it is difficult for the court to subpoena evidence. This evidence says that it's like unconstitutional to subpoena evidence that is encrypted, that has this end-to-end encryption. And so perhaps this is a workaround. The reason this might be a pro argument is because the idea is like government officials, for example, who are communicating on like signal chats, they might be doing a bunch of nefarious things that are like illegal, and there might be probable cause to suspect this. And so then the court might subpoena their chat, but they can't subpoena the chat because it's end-to-end encrypted. And so the way that you would do a workaround is you would be able to get lawful access to this through the encryption without a subpoena, or with a subpoena, I think. Like this just would allow you to access it directly through government law enforcement agencies, and to be used as legal evidence in the case to maybe indict these law enforcement or like indict these government officials who are doing nefarious or illegal things over their signal chat. Um, this might be a good thing because it like enables more watchdog behavior, right? It means that it is easier to create transparency and hold like government officials accountable if they're doing illegal things or things that like violate the Constitution or violate people's rights, which might be something that we want to reduce government overreach and also to get another link turn on what the neg is likely to run, which is about like government overreach, violations of privacy, um, the government using data in really bad ways. Like if we can use this to actually check back on the government using data in bad ways, not only in the context of surveillance, but maybe in a bunch of other areas of policy as well, then this might be a net turn to like this authoritarianism slide the neg might go for. The reason that I think that there might be like a weird and maybe counterintuitive neg impact turn here is because of this card that I found, which is that there was like a conservative group that is technically a watchdog group that tried to sue the EPA because it seemed like EPA officials were communicating over a signal chat in order to try to thwart some of the like the things that the Trump administration was doing. To me, this seems like a good thing, right? Like, this is like a base of resistance against the Trump administration in the name of like pursuing more climate justice, right? Or more strict regulations and things like that to protect the environment. I don't know. Obviously, like there can be an additional debate about whether or not this is good or not, and probably, and on top of that, a debate about whether or not, like, even if this could create good outcomes, if it should be allowed democratically for like an agency to directly go against the executive branch. Maybe not. I'm just saying that like there might be a little bit of ground for an impact turn there. Regardless, this card basically speaks to the logic of this argument, be it on the pro or the con, which is that these watchdog agencies are much less effective when they run into encryption, because the end-to-end encryption means they could just delete the messages, and because no one else has them, because it's only the users themselves, then you just don't have the evidence anymore. So you can't use it in like a court case, for instance, to hold anyone accountable. Which again, I think is more intuitively a pro argument if you maybe find a more clearly pro card here. But yeah, so that's all of the prep that I've done. Once again, if you have any questions about any of this or questions about anything related to the topic, please feel free to ask. I'll continue doing the same thing I did today, where I put a Q&A at the top, and I'll answer some of those questions to the best of my ability. Next time, I will be doing a deeper dive on con research, and then hopefully in the next few days, I'll start actually writing contentions with cards and stuff, so you can see my thought process and my kind of workflow. Okay, as always, the last thing we're going to do is do some Ecuador GeoGuessr. In the past couple days, I've been learning a little bit more about how to region guess Ecuador. I didn't have the most glamorous performance last video, but hopefully I'll do a little bit better today because I've been learning a bit. I had like a miracle seed yesterday where I actually was #1 on the leaderboard now for Ecuador, but I doubt that that's going to happen again. It might have been a bit of a fluke, but let's try. All right, loading into the first of 5 locations here. Okay, I do think I know where this is, potentially. Um, Potentially. Does this say anything? La Esperanza, Eco Vivero. I don't think that has a location on it, unless La Esperanza is something. But I mean, that's just what the hope. Probably either a company name. Ooh. Okay, this thing on the pole, I'm pretty sure we might be in the Amazon, first of all, which kind of makes sense with the flatness. I mean, you would expect a lot of mountains like the ones I see out my window in the rest of Ecuador. These are really interesting. What the heck are these? I'm gonna research these later because this is I wonder if this is like some sort of like seed pod or some sort of like insect nest or something. That's interesting. But this tree right here with the white trunk, it actually ironically I think this is also a guarumo, which is the same species as the one outside my window, but obviously like I guess a different subspecies because it looks very different. And the palms do make sense. This kind of like palmetto stuff makes sense. I think I do like the Nueva Loja guess. So I'm just going to guess this road because it lines up and it was that road. All right, great. So doing better already. I think that was literally like in one guess, the same score in total that I got last time. So we're already doing better. Let's see. This is a weird and very difficult round, I expect. Um, Obviously, we're thinking very wet, very mountainous. Um, Although I don't, it's hard to tell how mountainous it is because the clouds kind of obscure things. This is a plant that I researched that's called fire spike, which is interesting. It grows honestly more so it can grow down here in the south. It can also grow all the way up to like Santo Domingo, which is where we could be. I don't know if it grows elsewhere. These rocks are interesting. Like these hills are weirdly small by Ecuadorian standards, I think. But I'm yapping too much, so I should probably just send in some guess. I mean, it's gonna be either Santo Domingo or it's gonna be down by like Machala. I think I like Santo Domingo better, but it's honestly a bit of a coin flip here, and it could be really anywhere in these coastal regions. Okay, it was closer to Santo Domingo. I'm happy with that guess. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right. Next. What is this? These are cool fences with these like red spikes on the top. Ooh, that's an interesting house with this kind of like thatch roof. I feel like that, I don't know, reminds me more of the Amazon, which makes sense because look at how many of these white tree trunks we have. Um, and so maybe I'm thinking like Tena or something, which is one of the more, or like Macas. Either of those are like some of the more hilly regions of the Amazon. I kind of like it. Of course, it's hard to tell the difference sometimes between the Amazon and like the area over here by the coast. Sometimes they can look similar, but I like it could be Tena, Puyo, Macas. It's probably one of these. I'll hedge and go like Puyo. Okay, and it was the coastal area. Oh, okay. I think I made the same mistake last video, so I'll have to study the differences between those. Okay, what do we have here? Um, Pilileo Velocidad. I don't think that has anything useful. Oh, this is interesting. We've got like a weird colors, not Ecuadorian flag colors on the bottom of that pole. Okay, big mountains over there. Um, so obviously we're in the middle of the country as a result. Tough to say exactly where. Does this have anything? Uh, Probably, but I can't really read it. So that's unfortunate. Um, let's see. What are my thoughts on this? These trees are really cool. They actually are in downtown Quito all over the place. I saw a lot of these on my walk yesterday. And we also have some eucalyptus over there. And these interesting, more like, I don't know, I feel like cold weather trees, like pines and stuff. We have huge mountains, at least on one side, and we're kind of like going down into them into this valley. So I feel like we're going to be in this kind of general valley area. Could be Ambato, could even be just Quito, but I don't know. I guess I can literally look outside and compare. Um, I don't know. I don't know if this feels big enough to be Quito. Let's just try Ambato. It was Ambato. Okay. Feel good about that one. All right, I think, yes, last round for this. Um, we have a relatively generic looking round, not the easiest for sure. There's something special, I think, about these chevrons, but I don't remember what it is. Um, I mean, yeah, average, average Ecuador location. Um, Yeah, I'm pretty lost with these ones, but I'll try to vibe it out. It's going to be hard to explain my thought process though, because this does look somewhat generic. And we have these ferns, we have a little bit of taller grass, which might indicate a little bit further south, but I wouldn't really expect this many trees on the mountains in the south. Um, Maybe we're just in one of these like random pockets. Could even be over by Santo Domingo. I could see that. Let's guess like here. Okay, actually, quite good guess. I kind of moved off of it. It was the Sangay National Park. Cool, but yeah, I mean, pretty happy with that. 17K, not bad at all. In fact, I think that puts us pretty high in the leaderboards again. Let's see. Yeah, it's like around sixth place or something. So definitely happy with that. The studying is paying off, and hopefully next time I do even better. But if I get better enough at this, I'll probably just switch to a different country and then continue from there. But yeah, see you guys tomorrow.